The Aspen trip is booked for next week. Perfect timing to finalize everything while she's distracted. My husband whispered into his phone, unaware I was standing just outside his home office. Greg's confident voice carried through the partially open door as I stood frozen, the quarterly reports I'd brought to show him slipping from my trembling fingers. For a moment, I couldn't process what I was hearing. Who was he talking to about me? What needed to be finalized while I was away? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Don't worry about Natalie, Greg continued, his voice dropping lower. Once she signs the transfer papers in Aspen, Reynolds Group will complete the acquisition immediately. She'll be too busy skiing to realize what's happened until it's too late. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself, my wedding ring catching the afternoon light that streamed through our bay windows. 13 years of marriage, and in that moment, I felt like I was hearing my husband's voice for the first time. Clinical, calculating, completely foreign. The board members are on board, he added with a soft laugh that turned my stomach. Except Jackson, but she's being handled. One romantic getaway, and Natalie will sign anything I put in front of her. By the time she realizes what's happened, Evergreen will be gutted and sold for parts. Evergreen Innovation Labs, my company, the sustainable technology firm I'd built from nothing over the past decade, now employing over 200 people in Portland. And my husband, my CFO husband, who had always claimed to be my biggest supporter, was orchestrating its destruction behind my back. The signs had been there for months, but I'd been too consumed with our newest product launch to notice them. Greg's sudden interest in our company's organizational structure, his suggestion that I delegate more signing authority to him to ease my burden, the late-night calls that abruptly ended when I entered the room, the unexplained meetings with Victor Hamilton, whose company had been trying to acquire our sustainable battery technology for years. I backed away from the door silently, my mind racing. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, a meeting Greg had suggested I could skip for once, since nothing crucial was on the agenda. Now I understood why. With reports still clutched in my hand, I retreated to my home office, locking the door behind me. My hands shook as I called the one person I knew I could trust completely. "Vanessa, I need you to come over, now." My best friend since college didn't ask questions. She heard the tremor in my voice and promised to be there in 30 minutes. While waiting, I pulled up our company's recent financial reports on my laptop, seeing them with new eyes. Small, irregularities I'd attributed to reconciliation errors now formed a pattern. Key patents had been restructured under subsidiary companies. Decision-making authorities had been subtly redistributed. Greg had been laying groundwork for months. Vanessa arrived with her signature promptness, still dressed in her courtroom attire. As one of Portland's top corporate attorneys, she'd been an invaluable sounding board throughout Evergreen's growth. "What's happened?" she asked, taking in my pale face as I led her to the garden patio where we couldn't be overheard. I recounted what I'd overheard, my voice steadying as shock gave way to clarity. "He's been planning this for months, Van. The vacation, the board meeting, it's all part of it." Vanessa's expression darkened. "That's not just betrayal, Nat. What you're describing could constitute corporate fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Reynolds Group has been after our battery technology since we received the federal certification," I explained. "Victor Hamilton's fingerprints are all over this, but I never imagined Greg would." I couldn't finish the sentence. "Who else knows about the Aspen trip?" Vanessa asked, already shifting into strategic mode. "Everyone. He announced it at the company holiday party last week, portrayed it as a celebration of our recent government contract." I laughed bitterly. He made quite a show of it, actually. Projected photos of the luxury chalet on the screen. Talked about how I deserved a break after working so hard. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "So he's created public witnesses to the narrative." that this trip was his generous gift to his hard-working wife. Nice touch. The board meeting is tomorrow. He thinks I'm skipping it to prepare for the trip. I pressed my fingers against my temples. What am I going to do, Van? The majority of the board has apparently already been convinced. Call my brother, Vanessa said decisively. Ryan can analyze your financial records tonight, find any irregularities Greg's created. Then you attend that board meeting tomorrow, and you bring evidence. Ryan Chen arrived an hour later, his expertise in forensic accounting exactly what we needed. While Greg attended a client dinner that evening, Ryan, Vanessa, and I spread financial documents across my home office floor, tracking money movements and authorization changes. Here, Ryan pointed to a series of transactions dated 3 months earlier. These transfers to Meridian Holdings, that's a shell company. I've seen this pattern before. Meridian? I frowned. Greg told me that was a potential manufacturing partner. I signed off on preliminary discussions. It's registered to an address in Seattle, Ryan continued, typing rapidly on his laptop. The same building as Foster & Associates Financial Group, my husband's private consultation firm, the one he maintained separate from his role as Evergreen's CFO. The firm he'd always insisted kept him sharp for his work with my company. There's more, Ryan said grimly. Meridian has been filing preliminary patents that mirror your proprietary technology with just enough modifications to claim they're different. They've been reverse engineering our products, I whispered, the magnitude of the betrayal expanding. Using our own research to create competing patents. Vanessa placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. We need to contact Eleanor Jackson. If she's the only board member who hasn't been compromised. She's being handled, according to Greg, I reminded her. Then we unhandle her, Vanessa replied firmly. And we need to talk to Zoe, if anyone knows what's been happening inside. Evergreen when you're not looking, it's your assistant. While Ryan continued his financial excavation, I called Zoe Taylor, my assistant of 5 years. Her response to my carefully worded questions confirmed my worst fears. There have been closed-door meetings all month, she confirmed, her voice dropping to a whisper though she was calling from her home. Mr. Foster and Martin Rodriguez have been meeting with people I was told not to put on the official calendar. And Natalie. Cassandra Winters has been coming to the office when you're out. Cassandra Winters, Greg's former colleague from his investment banking days, now a senior executive at Reynolds Group. Her name shouldn't have been a surprise, but it felt like another blow. How long? I asked, already knowing the answer. At least 6 months, Zoe admitted. I thought it was just business at first, but last week I overheard them in the conference room. They were discussing asset valuations and mentioned the Aspen trip. Something felt wrong. By midnight, we had assembled enough evidence to confirm what I'd overheard. Greg, in conjunction with Reynolds Group and likely with help from Martin, Rodriguez, my CFO, had been systematically preparing Evergreen for acquisition, devaluing certain assets, restructuring others, and positioning my company for a hostile takeover disguised as a friendly merger. We need to move quickly, Vanessa advised as Ryan packed up his documentation. Before tomorrow's board meeting, contact Eleanor Jackson. Then we go in prepared to counter everything they've set up. After they left, I sat alone in my home office, surrounded by the evidence of my husband's betrayal. When Greg returned from his client dinner shortly after midnight, I was waiting in the kitchen, a cup of tea in my hands and a manufactured smile on my face. You're up late, he observed, loosening his tie. His cologne carried an unfamiliar note. A women's perfume, I realized. Cassandra's? Just finalizing some things before our trip, I replied, amazed at how steady my voice remained. I'm really looking forward to it. Greg's smile was smooth, practiced. A smile I now recognized had been weaponized against me countless times. You deserve it, honey. You've been working too hard. The board meeting tomorrow, I said casually. Are you sure you don't need me there? I could delay my spa appointment. His response was immediate, confirming my suspicions. Absolutely not. It's just routine approvals, budget allocations, nothing that needs your attention. Martin and I can handle it. I nodded, maintaining my facade. If you're sure. Positive. He leaned down to kiss my cheek, and it took every ounce of self-control not to recoil. Get some rest. Tomorrow's a big day. Indeed it was, I thought as I watched him head upstairs. But not for the reasons he believed. After a sleepless night, I called Eleanor Jackson at 6 a.m., catching her during her morning run. Eleanor, I need to meet with you before the board meeting. It's urgent. To her credit, the former tech executive who'd been my first major investor didn't hesitate. My house, 1 hour. Eleanor's modernist home in the West Hills overlooked the city where I'd built Evergreen from a startup operating out of my garage to one of Portland's most promising green technology companies. As I laid out what we'd discovered, her expression shifted from shock to cold fury. Reynolds Group approached me 3 weeks ago, she confirmed, Victor Hamilton personally. Said the board was unanimously moving toward acquisition, and I should align myself with the inevitable. When I refused, Greg reached out, implied that opposing the sale would damage my reputation in the industry. You were being pressured, I noted, relieved to have confirmation. I've been in this business 30 years, Natalie. It takes more than vague threats to pressure me. Eleanor's steely gaze met mine. I didn't build 3 successful companies by letting men in expensive suits dictate my decisions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. With Eleanor firmly on my side, we contacted 2 other board members who had been less directly involved in recent decisions. While not fully aware of what Greg had been orchestrating, they had sensed something unusual in the recent restructuring proposals. By 10 a.m., we had secured enough support to potentially block any immediate action. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. At 1:30, I walked into Evergreen's headquarters, Vanessa and Ryan flanking me like bodyguards. Zoe's eyes widened when she saw me. Mrs. Foster, I thought you were preparing for your trip. Change of plans, I replied calmly. I'll be attending the board meeting after all. Zoe's relief was palpable. I've prepared copies of all the documents Mr. Rodriguez requested, plus the additional contracts you asked me to pull together this morning. The conference room fell silent when I entered. Greg, mid-conversation with Martin Rodriguez, froze momentarily before recovering with practiced smoothness. Natalie, what a surprise. I thought you were getting ready for Aspen. I rearranged my schedule, I replied, setting my portfolio on the gleaming conference table. This meeting seemed too important to miss. Martin Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in his seat, not meeting my eyes. 2 other board members exchanged glances. Victor Hamilton, whose presence confirmed everything, smiled thinly. Mrs. Foster, how delightful. I was just discussing with the board some exciting potential synergies between our companies. I'm sure you were, Victor. I took my seat at the head of the table, Vanessa and Ryan positioning themselves strategically on either side of me. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce my counsel, Vanessa Patel, and financial advisor, Ryan Chen. They'll be joining us today. Greg's smile faltered slightly. Is that necessary? This is a standard quarterly meeting. Is it? I opened my portfolio, extracting the documents Ryan had prepared. Then perhaps you can explain these financial irregularities involving Meridian Holdings, or the unauthorized patent applications filed through your private consulting firm, or your meetings with Reynolds Group executives that never appeared on any official calendar. The room went deadly quiet. Greg's face drained of color, then flushed deeply. Martin Rodriguez stared fixedly at the table. Victor Hamilton's smile disappeared entirely. I'm not sure what you're implying, Greg began, his voice tight. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. I distributed copies of Ryan's analysis to each board member. Fact. For at least 6 months, you've been systematically preparing Evergreen for acquisition without board authorization. Fact. You've established shell companies to siphon our intellectual property. Fact. You've conducted private negotiations with Reynolds Group, our direct competitor. Victor Hamilton stood abruptly. This is preposterous. I came here in good faith to discuss a potential business relationship beneficial to all parties. Did that business relationship include the conversation you had with my husband last night? I asked coolly. The one where you finalized plans to have me sign transfer documents while distracted on vacation? Or the one where you discussed gutting Evergreen for parts once the acquisition was complete? Eleanor Jackson spoke up, her voice carrying the weight of her decades in the industry. I've reviewed these documents. If accurate, they constitute serious breaches of fiduciary duty and potentially criminal acts. They're accurate, Ryan confirmed, and there's more evidence being processed as we speak. Greg's composure cracked entirely. Natalie, you're misinterpreting business discussions. Yes, we've been exploring options with Reynolds Group, but only to maximize shareholder value. By devaluing our primary assets? I challenged. By restructuring our patents to make them vulnerable? That's not maximizing value. That's corporate sabotage. This is absurd, Greg snapped, looking to Martin for support. Tell them, Martin. Everything we've done has been by the book. Martin Rodriguez, to my surprise, closed his eyes briefly before speaking. I was told these measures were approved by Mrs. Foster. If that's not the case... He left the sentence unfinished. No, it's not, I said quietly. You've been countersigning authorizations Greg claimed had my approval. The remainder of the meeting unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony, one where I finally held the conductor's baton. Each piece of evidence was presented methodically. Each denial was countered with documentation. Victor Hamilton left within 20 minutes, muttering about his legal team. Martin Rodriguez, seeing the tide turn, began offering detailed explanations of how he'd been misled. As the meeting concluded 3 hours later, several key motions had been passed. Greg's immediate suspension pending investigation, Martin's placement on administrative leave, a freeze on all recent restructuring activities, and the appointment of an independent auditor to review all transactions from the past year. Greg caught up to me in the hallway afterward, his face a mask of barely contained fury. You have no idea what you've done, he hissed. This deal would have set us both up for life. No, Greg, I corrected him calmly, though my heart was pounding. It would have destroyed everything I've built and betrayed everyone who's trusted in this company's mission. The Aspen trip is canceled, by the way. I suggest you find somewhere else to stay tonight. This isn't over, he warned, but the threat sounded hollow even to him. Actually, it is. Vanessa stepped forward, handing him an envelope. This is notification of impending legal action for corporate malfeasance, breach of fiduciary duty, and attempted fraud. I've also taken the liberty of freezing your access to joint accounts pending investigation. As Greg stormed out, Eleanor approached me. You know, when I invested in Evergreen 8 years ago, I wasn't just investing in your technology. I was investing in you, your vision, your integrity. Today proved I was right. I managed a small smile, professional composure barely containing the emotional turbulence beneath. Thank you, Eleanor, for everything. Only after returning to my now empty home did I allow myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. 13 years of marriage, a decade building Evergreen, all of it nearly destroyed by the person I'd trusted most. The betrayal cut bone deep, not just professional, but deeply personal. Vanessa arrived with takeout and wine an hour later, having anticipated I wouldn't want to be alone. The paperwork's filed, she confirmed. His corporate devices have been confiscated, and security has changed the access codes at headquarters. Ryan's team is doing a comprehensive financial review. Did you know? I asked suddenly, the question that had been haunting me. Did you ever suspect Greg was capable of this? Vanessa considered the question seriously before answering. No, I thought he was ambitious, maybe sometimes too focused on growth metrics. But this level of calculated betrayal? Never. I nodded, somehow comforted that my blindness hadn't been obvious to everyone. The board wants an emergency strategic meeting tomorrow. We need to address the damage control with employees, investors, and partners. One day at a time, Nat, Vanessa advised, refilling my wine glass. Today you saved your company. Tomorrow, you can figure out how to rebuild. That night, alone in what had once been our bedroom, I found a folder hidden in Greg's nightstand. Inside were brochures for luxury condominiums in Seattle, walking distance from Reynolds Group's headquarters, and photos of him with Cassandra Winters that went far beyond professional collaboration. The final pieces clicked into place. The betrayal had been complete. Husband, business partner, confidant, all masks covering a man I had never truly known. But as I closed the folder, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. In trying to take everything from me, Greg had inadvertently given me something invaluable. The truth, and with it, freedom to rebuild on my own terms. The emergency. Strategic meeting the next morning had a different energy than any previous board gathering. With Greg and Martin absent, and 2 additional board members joining remotely, we addressed the immediate concerns, stabilizing employee confidence, reassuring major clients, and establishing a transparent timeline for the investigation. The most important message, Eleanor emphasized, is continuity and strength. Evergreen isn't defined by one person's actions. It's defined by its mission and the team that executes it. Zoe had organized an all-hands meeting for the afternoon, giving me time to prepare what would be the most difficult company address I'd ever delivered. Danielle Cooper, our former head of R&D who had left 6 months earlier under circumstances that now seemed suspicious, had reached out after hearing rumors of yesterday's boardroom confrontation. Greg made it impossible for me to do my job, she confirmed when I called her. Kept redirecting our research priorities, insisted on compartmentalizing the team to improve efficiency. When I questioned it, he suggested to you that I was resistant to necessary changes. I believed him, I acknowledged, the weight of my misplaced trust growing heavier. Danielle, I can't undo what happened, but I'd like to talk about your potential return. We need your expertise now, more than ever. By the time I stood before Evergreen's assembled employees that afternoon, I had a clearer vision of both what had happened and what needed to happen next. Transparency seemed the only viable path forward. Many of you have heard rumors about yesterday's board meeting, I began, scanning the faces of the team I'd built. Rather than allow speculation to continue, I want to address the situation directly. For the past several months, there has been an organized effort to devalue Evergreen and prepare it for acquisition. An acquisition that would have resulted in the dismantling of everything we've built together. The room remained silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on me as I continued. This effort involved individuals both inside and outside our company, including our former CFO. Thanks to the vigilance of several team members and board directors, this attempt was identified and stopped. An investigation is ongoing, and we will pursue appropriate legal actions. I drew a deep breath before continuing. But today isn't about what almost happened. It's about what happens next. Evergreen's mission hasn't changed. Our commitment to developing sustainable technology solutions is stronger than ever. What has changed is our understanding of how valuable what we're building truly is. Valuable enough that others would go to extraordinary lengths to acquire it. For the next hour, I outlined the immediate changes in leadership, the financial, safeguards being implemented, and the renewed focus on our core technological innovations. Questions came rapidly, some pointed, others concerned. I answered each one with as much honesty as legal constraints would allow. When asked directly about Greg's involvement, I didn't shield him. Yes, my husband was central to this attempt. This represents both a professional and personal betrayal that I'm still processing. But Evergreen has always been bigger than any individual, including me. That remains true today. By the meeting's end, the initial shock had transformed into something resembling cautious determination. Several department heads stayed afterward, offering support and sharing their own observations of unusual activities they'd noticed but hadn't connected until now. Martin Rodriguez's assistant approached me privately, eyes downcast. "Mrs. Foster, there are files on Mr. Rodriguez's private server that I think you should see. Communications with Reynolds Group dating back almost a year." The days that followed brought more revelations. The planned acquisition would have resulted in Evergreen being effectively dismantled, our research team scattered, our patents absorbed into Reynolds Group's portfolio, and our manufacturing facilities closed. The sustainable vision that had driven me to found the company would have been abandoned in favor of more immediately profitable applications. Most painfully, I discovered that Greg's betrayal had begun not with greed, but with resentment. In emails to Cassandra, he complained about living in my shadow, about being seen as Mr. Evergreen, instead of recognized for his own financial acumen. What had started as professional jealousy had metastasized into something far more destructive. Legal proceedings moved forward swiftly. With evidence mounting daily, Greg agreed to a settlement that included surrendering his ownership stake in Evergreen and signing comprehensive non-disclosure agreements. The divorce proceedings were equally efficient, if emotionally devastating. The life we'd built together was dismantled with the same clinical precision he'd planned to use on my company. Victor Hamilton and Reynolds Group faced federal investigations for their role in the attempted hostile takeover. Martin Rodriguez provided evidence against all parties in exchange for immunity, revealing the elaborate scheme in its entirety. 6 months after the board meeting that changed everything, Evergreen held its first innovation showcase since the crisis. Our newest sustainable battery technology, the very innovation Greg and Reynolds had coveted, was being implemented in a pilot program with the City of Portland. Danielle Cooper, reinstated as our Chief Innovation Officer, led the presentation with the confidence and vision that had made her invaluable to Evergreen from its earliest days. After the showcase, Eleanor Jackson found me on the rooftop garden. We'd installed as part of our headquarters' green initiative. "You've done remarkable work rebuilding," she observed, looking out over the city. "Not just the company's infrastructure, but its spirit." "We had a solid foundation," I replied. Once we cleared away what was compromising it, that became apparent again. "And personally?" she asked with the directness that characterized her mentorship. "How are you rebuilding there?" I considered the question honestly. Some days are harder than others. Trusting my own judgment again has been the biggest challenge. Yet here you are, making better decisions than ever. Eleanor's approval wasn't freely given, making it all the more valuable. The board is unanimous about the company's direction now. That's rare in my experience. That evening, I met Vanessa and Ryan for dinner at the small restaurant where Evergreen had been conceived over a decade earlier, scribbled on napkins and fueled by idealism. "To what might have been the worst vacation ever," Vanessa toasted, raising her glass with a smile that acknowledged both the humor and gravity of what we'd overcome. "To friends who become family when it matters most," I countered, including Ryan in the toast. Later, walking alone along the Willamette River, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The company hadn't just survived. It had emerged, stronger, more focused, more united in its mission. The betrayal that could have destroyed everything had instead forced a reckoning that clarified what truly mattered. Greg had been right about one thing. I had been working too hard, too focused on Evergreen to notice what was happening in my own home. The irony was that his attempt to exploit that dedication had ultimately helped me find better balance. The company no longer consumed my entire identity because I'd been forced to rediscover who I was beyond it. My phone buzzed with a message from Zoe. Reminder: tomorrow's mentorship program launches at 9 a.m. The program, supporting women in sustainable technology, had been my first initiative after stabilizing the company. Creating something positive, from my experience, had been essential to moving forward. Tomorrow, 20 young women would begin a 6-month immersion in both the technical and leadership aspects of the industry, with Evergreen's senior team providing personalized guidance. As Portland's lights reflected on the river's surface, I felt a sense of peace that had been absent for longer than I cared to admit. The emergency board meeting that had exposed Greg's betrayal hadn't just saved my company. It had set me on a path to rebuilding everything on a stronger, truer foundation. He had planned for Aspen to be the end of my story. Instead, it had become merely the end of a chapter, with the most meaningful parts of the narrative still unwritten. And this time, I held the pen. The morning after discovering Greg's betrayal, I woke before dawn, my mind racing with urgent tasks that needed immediate attention. My bedroom, our bedroom, felt foreign now, filled with photographs and mementos of a relationship that had been carefully weaponized against me. I slipped out of bed quietly. Though I knew Greg had spent most of the night in his home office, his typing audible through the wall as he presumably tried to salvage whatever remained of his plans. As the first hints of sunrise painted Portland's skyline in gold and pink, I sat in my garden sanctuary with a steaming cup of coffee, making calls that couldn't wait. By 7, I had spoken with Andrew Morrison, the corporate attorney Vanessa had recommended as additional counsel, and scheduled an emergency meeting at his downtown office. Mrs. Foster, I've reviewed the preliminary documentation Ms. Patel sent over, Andrew explained when I arrived at his sleek office overlooking the Willamette River. If what you've uncovered is accurate, we're looking at potential securities, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and possibly corporate espionage. It's accurate, I confirmed, sliding across the USB drive containing everything Ryan had compiled overnight. My question is, how quickly can we move to protect Evergreen? Andrew's expression was grave as he inserted the drive into his computer. Corporate takeovers, even hostile ones, aren't inherently illegal. The fraud lies in how it was orchestrated, particularly by insiders with fiduciary obligations to your company. For the next 2 hours, we outlined a comprehensive legal strategy. Immediate injunctions to halt any pending transactions, documentation preservation orders, notifications to regulatory agencies. By the time I left Andrew's office, the legal machinery was in motion. My next stop was a discreet cafe several blocks from Evergreen's headquarters, where Eleanor Jackson was already waiting, her silver hair pulled back in her characteristic no-nonsense bun, tablet and coffee positioned precisely on the table before her. Martin Rodriguez arrived early at the office today, she reported without preamble. He's been pulling financial reports and accessing secured servers since 6 a.m. Security logs show he downloaded several terabytes of data. My stomach tightened. Can we lock him out of the system remotely? Not without tipping our hand, Eleanor replied. But I've had IT quietly implement a tracking protocol on all downloads. We'll know exactly what he's accessing and where it's going. I nodded, grateful once again for Eleanor's foresight. As a 3-time successful tech CEO before becoming an investor and board member, she had navigated corporate crises that made our current situation seem almost straightforward by comparison. The other board members? I asked. Philip and Diane are still on the fence. They've worked with Greg for years and trust his financial judgment. The others are waiting to see evidence before committing either way. She leaned forward, her expression softening slightly. This won't be easy, Natalie. They'll try to paint you as emotional, reactionary, possibly even incompetent. The hysterical female CEO narrative is as old as business itself. Let them try, I replied, my resolve hardening. I've dealt with that narrative since founding Evergreen. It didn't stop me then. Eleanor's smile was thin but approving. No, it didn't. Now, about the Reynolds Group connection. I've been making discreet inquiries. Victor Hamilton has apparently been telling people that Evergreen is facing financial difficulties and looking for a strategic partnership. This new information slotted into place like another puzzle piece. Creating market conditions to justify a lowball acquisition, I murmured. Classic predatory tactic? Precisely. And there's something else you should know. Eleanor hesitated briefly. Cassandra Winters isn't just Reynolds Group's acquisition specialist. She and Greg have a personal history that predates your marriage. The revelation shouldn't have stung given everything else I'd discovered, but it did. Another layer to a betrayal that seemed to grow more complex by the hour. How personal? They were engaged briefly before he met you, Eleanor said gently. It ended badly, according to industry gossip at the time. But they reconnected at the Clean Energy Conference in Seattle last year, the one Greg attended representing Evergreen. The conference where Greg had stayed 3 extra days for valuable networking opportunities. The pieces continued falling into horrible clarity. Thank you for telling me, I managed, compartmentalizing the personal pain to focus on the business. Implications. It explains the level of coordination. It also gives us leverage, Eleanor pointed out pragmatically. Undisclosed conflicts of interest at that level won't look good for Reynolds Group when this becomes public. By mid-morning, I had established a makeshift command center in Vanessa's law office, safely away from Evergreen headquarters, where my unexpected presence might alert Greg or Martin. Ryan had brought in 2 associates from his financial forensics firm, who were meticulously documenting the money trail through Evergreen's subsidiaries. They've been careful, Ryan admitted, pointing to a complex flowchart displayed on the conference room wall. But not careful enough. See these transactions to Meridian Holdings? They coincide exactly with our patent filings. They were essentially paying themselves for stolen intellectual property. Can we prove Greg authorized these? Andrew asked, examining the documents. Ryan nodded grimly. His digital signature is on every transfer, though he used Natalie's pre-approved authorization protocols to mask his direct involvement. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Mr. Foster asking where you are. Told him spa day as instructed. He seemed relieved. Good. Let him believe I remained oblivious, focused on preparing for our Aspen trip. Every hour he spent confident in his plan was another hour we had to dismantle it. I've been analyzing the board member voting patterns, Vanessa said, spreading out a document timeline. Philip Chen and Diane Murray have voted with Greg on every financial restructuring proposal for the past 4 months. Either they're complicit, or they trust his expertise and haven't looked closely at the implications, I finished. Philip backed my first funding round when nobody else would. I can't believe he'd knowingly undermine Evergreen. People can surprise you, Ryan muttered, then glanced up apologetically. Sorry, Natalie. No, you're right. I straightened my shoulders. But I've known Philip for 12 years. Before we approach him, I want to understand exactly what Greg told him to secure his support. Andrew's assistant interrupted with a stack of freshly printed legal documents. The temporary restraining orders are ready for your review, and Judge Watkins can see us at 1 o'clock if we're filing today. A separate legal team was preparing for the board meeting, drafting resolutions and documenting potential violations of corporate governance. Every aspect of our counter-strategy needed to be airtight. Greg wouldn't go down without a fight. And Reynolds Group had significantly more resources at their disposal. As noon approached, I received an unexpected call from Danielle Cooper, Evergreen's former head of R&D, who had left the company 6 months earlier after increasing conflicts with Greg over research priorities. Natalie, I've been hearing rumors, she began cautiously. Is something happening with Evergreen? I hesitated, weighing how much to reveal to a former employee. Even one I had trusted implicitly before Greg had convinced me her resistance to structural changes was hampering innovation. "Why do you ask?" I countered. "Because Victor Hamilton contacted me last week about a senior position at Reynolds," she replied, her voice tight with controlled anger. "He specifically mentioned that they were consolidating resources from Evergreen and wanted me to head the transition team for the battery technology division." My division, Natalie. The one Greg dismantled after I left. My free hand curled into a fist as another piece of the betrayal took shape. "Danielle, if you're willing, I need everything you can remember about your interactions with Greg before you left, particularly regarding the compartmentalization of the research teams." "Willing?" Danielle laughed darkly. "I've been documenting everything since he first started interfering with our research protocols. I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't prove it was more than management overreach." "Can you meet us?" I asked, hope flaring that we might have another crucial ally. "I'm already in my car," she confirmed. "Text me the address." While waiting for Danielle, I reviewed the board meeting agenda Greg had circulated the previous day. Item 3, innocuously labeled Strategic Partnership Evaluation, was undoubtedly where the Reynolds Group acquisition would be introduced, the culmination of months of covert preparation. Danielle arrived carrying a weather-beaten leather portfolio bulging with documents. At 45, with prematurely silver hair and the focused intensity that had made her one of the top research scientists in sustainable energy, she radiated, controlled fury as she spread her documentation across the conference table. "It started with security protocols," she explained, pointing to a memo dated nearly 9 months earlier. "Greg implemented new data protection measures that effectively siloed our research teams. No cross-team collaboration without executive approval, which increasingly wasn't granted." Andrew leaned forward, examining the memo. "This references intellectual property compartmentalization to maximize future optionality. Interesting choice of words." "It gets better," Danielle continued, flipping to another document. 3 months in, he restructured our patent application process. Instead of filing comprehensive patents covering entire systems, he insisted we break everything into smaller components filed under different subsidiary entities. At the time, he claimed it was for tax optimization. Ryan whistled softly, making it easier to sell off pieces separately. "Classic dismantling preparation." "Exactly. But I didn't see the full picture until I received this." She produced an email with Reynolds Group letterhead. 2 weeks after I resigned from Evergreen. A confidential industry opportunity assessment, specifically referencing technologies my team had developed, some that hadn't even been publicly disclosed. The email confirmed what we already suspected. Reynolds hadn't opportunistically targeted Evergreen. This had been a coordinated long-term strategy, with Greg providing inside information every step of the way. As Danielle continued detailing Greg's systematic undermining of Evergreen's research integrity, my phone lit up with a call from the office. Martin Rodriguez. I showed the screen to Vanessa, who nodded. "Put it on speaker," she whispered. "Keep it casual." I answered with forced lightness. "Martin, what's up?" "Natalie, just checking on the quarterly projections for the board presentation. Are you planning to attend after all?" His voice carried an undercurrent of tension that I'd previously attributed to his exacting professional standards, but now recognized as something darker. "Still deciding," I replied non-committally. "Why? Is there something specific you need from me?" No, he backpedaled quickly. "Just finalizing the attendance list, the catering order," he added with a weak laugh. "I'll let you know by 1, I promised, then ended the call before my composure could crack. "He's nervous," Ryan observed. "Probably wondering if you've seen anything suspicious in the reports." "Good," Eleanor said firmly. "Nervous people make mistakes." By early afternoon, Judge Watkins had granted our emergency temporary restraining orders, freezing certain corporate actions pending full legal review. Andrew had filed them under seal to prevent premature discovery, but they provided critical legal protection if Greg tried forcing a vote at the board meeting. Vanessa had made contact with Philip Chen, approaching the situation delicately given his long relationship with both Greg and me. His response had been illuminating. "He was genuinely shocked when I outlined what we found," she reported. According to Philip, Greg presented the Reynolds discussions as a minority investment opportunity that would provide capital for expansion while keeping Evergreen's core technologies proprietary and under current management. "Not a full acquisition and dismantling," I noted bitterly. "Did he believe you?" "He wants to see the evidence himself, but yes, I think so." He specifically mentioned that the terms Greg described to the board don't match what Victor Hamilton has been saying privately to industry contacts. With Philip potentially swinging to our side, and Eleanor already firmly opposed to the acquisition, we might have enough votes to block any immediate board action. But simply preventing the acquisition wasn't enough. We needed to remove Greg's ability to damage Evergreen further. As the afternoon progressed, we finalized our strategy for the board meeting. I would attend unexpectedly, with Vanessa and Ryan present as expert advisors. Andrew had prepared a comprehensive presentation documenting the legal and financial irregularities we'd uncovered. Danielle would remain on standby, ready to address the research manipulation if needed. "What about Greg's personal devices?" I asked, suddenly realizing a potential vulnerability in our plan. "He'll have his own copies of documents, communications with Reynolds." "Already handled," Ryan assured me. "The restraining order includes all relevant corporate data, regardless of where it's stored. If he destroys evidence after being served, that's a separate criminal offense." At 4:00, I received a text from Greg. "Heading into pre-meeting prep with Martin and the Reynolds team. Everything on track for tomorrow's board meeting. Don't forget your spa appointment in the morning before we leave for Aspen. Love. You." The casual "love you" turned my stomach. How many times had he said those words while actively working to destroy everything I'd built? "We should discuss what happens after tomorrow," Eleanor said quietly as the others packed up documentation for the morning. "Assuming we succeed in blocking the acquisition and exposing Greg's actions, Evergreen will still face significant challenges." She was right, of course. The company would need to address market concerns, reassure employees, rebuild damaged systems, and recover misappropriated intellectual property. And I would need to navigate the public and private fallout of my husband's betrayal. "One battle at a time," I replied, though my mind was already racing ahead to the recovery phase. "First, we save the company." "And yourself," Eleanor added pointedly. "Don't forget that part." That evening, I returned home to find Greg already there, unusually attentive as he prepared dinner in our kitchen. The domestic scene might have seemed normal to an outside observer, successful husband cooking for his busy executive wife. But every interaction now carried ominous undertones. "Productive day at the spa?" he asked, stirring a risotto that had once been my favorite meal. "Very relaxing," I lied smoothly. "And you? How was the office?" "Just finalizing some quarterly reports for tomorrow's meeting. Nothing exciting." He poured me a glass of wine, the same vintage we'd shared on our honeymoon. "Everything's packed for Aspen. We leave right after the board meeting wraps up. I've arranged for a car to take us directly to the airport." The careful planning was almost admirable in its thoroughness. He'd orchestrated every detail to ensure minimal resistance, keep me distracted with spa treatments, rush me from the board meeting to the airport before I could speak with anyone, then serve divorce papers in an isolated luxury chalet where I'd have limited support or resources. "That sounds perfect," I responded, matching his casual tone while mentally confirming our counter-strategy details. Though I was thinking I might stop by the board meeting briefly, just to say hello before we leave. A flicker of alarm crossed his face before his practiced smile reasserted itself. There's really no need. It's all routine business this quarter. You should enjoy your morning off. Maybe you're right, I conceded, watching relief replace his momentary tension. I'll decide in the morning. We ate dinner in surreal normalcy, discussing Aspen restaurants and ski conditions while both engaged in elaborate deception. Greg shared amusing anecdotes about client meetings that probably never happened. I asked innocent questions about board agenda items, watching how skillfully he redirected the conversation away from anything substantive. This man, who had once been my partner in both life and business, who had held me through my father's death and celebrated every evergreen milestone, was now a stranger performing a role. The performance was flawless, which only made it more disturbing. How long had our relationship been a calculated facade on his part? After dinner, he suggested, watching a movie, another attempt to maintain normalcy while keeping me from potentially discovering any incriminating information. I agreed, sensing an opportunity. Let me just check my email first, I said casually. I'm expecting final confirmation on that government contract. The government contract, a substantial Department of Energy agreement for our battery technology, represented exactly the kind of valuable asset Reynolds Group would want to acquire. Greg's expression remained neutral, but his fingers tightened slightly around his wine glass. Anything important can wait until after our trip, he suggested. You promised to disconnect from work in Aspen, remember? Just one quick check, I insisted, moving toward his home office where my laptop remained from the previous evening. 2 minutes, I promise. He followed me, hovering casually in the doorway as I opened my computer. His presence was supposedly supportive, but felt distinctly supervisory. I pulled up innocuous marketing reports while surreptitiously inserting a thumb drive Ryan had prepared, a specialized program that would silently copy specific categories of data from the home network, including any files Greg had recently accessed. Everything okay? He asked as the program ran invisibly in the background. Perfect, I confirmed, closing the laptop after confirming the data transfer was complete. You're right. Everything else can wait until we're back. Later, lying awake beside Greg's sleeping form, I contemplated the magnitude of what awaited us both tomorrow. The board meeting would permanently alter the trajectory of Evergreen, my marriage, and possibly my entire professional future. The thought should have terrified me, but instead, I felt an unexpected clarity. For months, I'd been navigating business challenges with incomplete information, making decisions while key facts were deliberately hidden from me. Tomorrow, whatever happened, would be based on truth rather than manipulation. There was a certain power in that, even amid the pain of betrayal. My phone vibrated softly on the nightstand, a text from Eleanor. Everything in place for tomorrow. Sleep well. Remember who built this company. A simple reminder, but exactly what I needed. Greg might have exploited my trust, leveraged my personal and professional vulnerabilities, and nearly succeeded in hijacking my life's work. But he hadn't built Evergreen. I had. From the initial patent drawings sketched at my kitchen table to the company now employing hundreds and revolutionizing sustainable energy storage, Evergreen had been my vision, my persistence, my determination to succeed despite countless obstacles. Tomorrow would bring another obstacle, perhaps the most personal I'd ever faced. But I wouldn't face it alone, and I wouldn't face it unprepared. I slipped out of bed before dawn, leaving Greg still asleep amid the expensive sheets he'd always insisted upon. In the quiet stillness of early morning, I dressed with particular care, choosing a charcoal gray suit that projected authority without ostentation, paired with the sapphire earrings my father had given me when Evergreen secured its first major contract. You've already succeeded where it matters most, he had told me then. You've remained true to your principles while building something that matters. Those principles would guide me through today's confrontation, whatever the outcome. I left, A note for Greg claiming an early massage appointment before our departure, buying precious hours to finalize preparations with my team. By 7, I was at Vanessa's office, reviewing last-minute strategy adjustments based on information Ryan's program had extracted overnight. "We hit the jackpot," Ryan announced, displaying emails between Greg and Cassandra Winters. Detailed? Discussions of how to structure the acquisition to minimize your authority during transition before removing you entirely. Plus this gem. He pointed to a particularly damning exchange where Greg outlined which evergreen technologies would be retained versus scrapped after acquisition. The advanced battery storage system, our most promising innovation for making renewable energy viable at utility scale, was specifically designated for patent isolation and controlled deprecation to protect existing market technologies. They weren't just planning to acquire Evergreen, I realized with growing horror. They were going to bury our most important environmental innovations to protect Reynolds Group's investments in conventional energy. Classic monopolistic strategy, Andrew confirmed grimly. Acquire and kill competing technologies. Given Reynolds' heavy investment in traditional power infrastructure, your storage technology represents a significant threat to their business model. This revelation shifted the stakes dramatically. Beyond the personal betrayal, beyond even the calculated corporate takeover, Greg and Reynolds were conspiring to suppress technology with profound environmental implications. Technology that could accelerate the transition away from fossil fuels by solving renewable energy storage challenges. We need to adjust our approach, I decided, a new determination hardening my resolve. This isn't just about saving Evergreen anymore. It's about protecting innovation that matters for reasons beyond profit. As our team finalized preparations, Zoe texted confirming that the board members were assembling at headquarters. Martin had asked her twice about my whereabouts, his anxiety becoming increasingly evident. At 1:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled meeting start, I entered Evergreen's headquarters through the side entrance, avoiding the main reception area where Greg might spot me prematurely. Vanessa and Ryan flanked me, carrying briefcases, containing everything we needed to dismantle months of careful conspiracy. Eleanor met us in the empty conference room adjacent to the boardroom, her expression both grim and satisfied. "They're all here," she reported quietly, "including Victor, Hamilton, and 2 other Reynolds Group executives." Greg introduced them as observing potential investment partners. "And the other board members?" I asked. Philip approached me privately before Greg arrived. He's reviewed the preliminary evidence we sent and has serious concerns. Diane still seems to be in Greg's camp, but she's just 1 vote. We reviewed our entrance timing once more, waiting until Greg had begun his presentation on the strategic partnership opportunity before making our unexpected appearance. The element of surprise would be crucial in disrupting their carefully rehearsed narrative. At precisely 2:15 p.m., we received the signal from Eleanor, who had returned to the boardroom. I took a deep breath, centering myself for the confrontation. Ahead then nodded to Vanessa and Ryan. "Let's go save Evergreen." As we approached the boardroom doors, I could hear Greg's voice carrying through the polished wood, smooth and persuasive as he outlined the extraordinary opportunity Reynolds Group presented for Evergreen's future. The same voice that had once promised to support my dreams was now systematically dismantling them for his own gain. The security officer stationed outside the boardroom, a longtime Evergreen employee, nodded respectfully as I approached, opening the door without, announcement as previously arranged. The momentary silence as I entered was absolute. Greg stood frozen mid-sentence at the presentation screen, which displayed a PowerPoint slide labeled Strategic Integration Timeline. Victor Hamilton and his Reynolds colleagues turned with expressions ranging from surprise to poorly concealed alarm. Martin Rodriguez paled visibly, shuffling papers as if to hide whatever documents lay before him. "Please continue, Greg," I said calmly, taking my seat at the head of the table. I'm particularly interested in this strategic integration timeline you were just explaining to my board. The stunned expressions around the boardroom table would have been almost comical under different circumstances. Greg recovered first, his professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. "Natalie, what a surprise. I thought you were at the spa this morning." His voice carried just the right note of pleasant confusion, but I caught the flash of calculation in his eyes as he quickly assessed this unexpected development. "I rescheduled," I replied evenly, gesturing to Vanessa and Ryan, who had taken positions against the wall behind me. "I hope you don't mind that I brought some colleagues. Given the apparent significance of today's agenda, it seemed appropriate to have specialized expertise available." Victor Hamilton straightened his bespoke suit jacket, his silver hair and commanding presence designed to intimidate. "Mrs. Foster, we were just discussing some preliminary exploratory concepts. Perhaps these outsiders should wait until the board has had a chance to review the basic framework." "That won't be necessary, Mr. Hamilton," I said, noting how he'd attempted to dismiss me with the use of my married name rather than my professional title. "Ms. Patel is Evergreen's outside counsel for this matter, and Mr. Chen is our financial consultant. They're both bound by confidentiality agreements." Martin Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Greg and me with poorly concealed anxiety. The other board members, Philip Chen, Diane Murray, Thomas Wilson, and of course Eleanor Jackson, watched with expressions ranging from confusion to growing suspicion. "Now," I continued, "please continue with your presentation on the strategic integration timeline. I'm particularly interested in when exactly Reynolds Group planned to dissolve our research division and suppress our battery storage technology." The silence that followed was deafening. Greg's carefully constructed narrative was crumbling before it had even been fully presented. "That's a rather dramatic mischaracterization," Hamilton interjected smoothly. "Reynolds Group has tremendous respect for Evergreen's innovations. Our interest is in accelerating your market penetration through our established distribution channels." "Really?" I raised an eyebrow, nodding to Ryan, who stepped forward with copies of the emails we'd recovered. "Then perhaps you can explain these communications between my husband and Cassandra Winters, detailing plans to isolate our battery patents and implement controlled deprecation to protect Reynolds' existing market technologies." As Ryan distributed the documents to each board member, Greg's composure finally slipped. "Those are private communications taken out of context," he snapped, his pleasant facade evaporating, "and likely obtained illegally." Andrew Morrison chose that moment to enter, carrying additional documentation in a leather portfolio. "Actually, Mr. Foster, they were obtained through entirely legal means, pursuant to Mrs. Foster's authorized access to company systems and joint personal accounts. I'd be happy to provide the relevant legal precedents if necessary." Philip Chen, who had been silently reviewing the emails, looked up with open shock. "Greg, is this accurate? These messages explicitly discuss dismantling Evergreen's research division." "It's a standard post-acquisition restructuring discussion," Greg insisted, though his voice had lost its usual conviction. "All options were being considered as part of due diligence. Including this?" Diane Murray, until now presumably in Greg's camp, held up one particularly damning email. "Once the transition is complete, Natalie can be offered a nominal advisory position with no operational authority or board seat. That doesn't sound like the partnership opportunity you described to us last month." "Or this," Thomas Wilson added, his typically quiet voice hardened with anger. "The environmental messaging has served its purpose in building market credibility, but Reynolds' shareholders will expect more immediate ROI priorities." He looked directly at me. "Natalie, this appears to be a fundamental betrayal of Evergreen's core mission." Victor Hamilton attempted to regain control of the narrative. "I assure you, these are merely preliminary discussions exploring all scenarios. Reynolds Group has every intention of maintaining Evergreen's environmental commitments. The same way you maintained similar commitments after acquiring Solar Path Technologies last year? Eleanor asked pointedly. Their renewable infrastructure division was shuttered within 3 months. 70 researchers laid off. Patents effectively buried. Hamilton's eyes narrowed at Eleanor, recognizing a formidable opponent. Different circumstances entirely. Market conditions dictated necessary adjustments. Market conditions, I repeated. Is that what you call it when you acquire innovative technology that threatens your existing business model, then systematically dismantle it? Martin Rodriguez cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we should take a brief recess to review these materials more thoroughly before continuing the discussion. An excellent suggestion, I agreed, though not for the reasons he intended. And while we do, I believe everyone should be aware that as of this morning, temporary restraining orders are in place, preventing any transfer of Evergreen's intellectual property, changes to corporate structure, or unusual financial transactions, pending full legal review. Greg stood abruptly. You had no authority to file such orders. Actually, as CEO and controlling shareholder, she has every authority, Andrew corrected calmly, particularly when presented with evidence of potential corporate malfeasance by officers with fiduciary responsibilities. The boardroom erupted into multiple conversations as the full implications became clear. Victor Hamilton conferred urgently with his Reynolds colleagues while Greg attempted to pull Martin aside. I caught fragments of their heated exchange. Damage, control, and alternative approach featuring prominently. Philip approached me directly, his expression grave. Natalie, I had no idea what was really happening. Greg presented this as a strategic investment that would preserve Evergreen's independence and accelerate our environmental impact. I believe you, Philip. I had known him too long to imagine he would knowingly participate in dismantling what we'd built. He manipulated all of us in different ways. Eleanor called the meeting back to order after the brief chaotic interlude. As the senior board member present, she commanded respect even from those who disagreed with her. Given the serious nature of the information presented, I believe we need to address several urgent governance matters, she stated firmly. First, the proposed Reynolds Group transaction must be tabled indefinitely pending full investigation. I second that motion, Thomas Wilson declared immediately. As acting chair for this portion of the meeting, I call for a vote, Eleanor continued. All in favor of indefinitely tabling any discussions regarding acquisition by or strategic partnership with Reynolds Group. Every hand raised except Greg's and Martin's. Victor Hamilton and his colleagues watched with poorly concealed fury as their carefully orchestrated acquisition plan collapsed. Motion carries, Eleanor announced. Second item, given the evidence presented regarding potential breaches of fiduciary duty, I move that Gregory Foster be temporarily relieved of his duties as CFO pending full investigation, with all financial authorities reverting to CEO Natalie Foster and an interim financial officer to be appointed immediately. Objection, Greg snapped. This is a railroading based on cherry-picked communications presented without proper context. I demand the opportunity to present a complete explanation. You'll have that opportunity during the investigation, Eleanor assured him. This is a temporary protective measure, not a final determination. All in favor? This vote was closer. Diane. Murray abstained, clearly uncomfortable with the rapid developments, but the motion still carried by a clear majority. This is outrageous, Victor Hamilton interjected, standing to emphasize his considerable stature. Reynolds Group came here in good faith to discuss a transaction that would have created substantial shareholder value. Instead, we've been ambushed with selective evidence and procedural maneuvers. You came here to facilitate the dismemberment of an environmental technology company whose innovations threaten your conventional energy investments, I corrected, matching his stare with equal intensity. That's not good faith, Mr. Hamilton. It's predatory opportunism facilitated by internal betrayal. Greg's demeanor had transformed entirely, the charming, supportive husband replaced by a cold, calculating opponent. "This isn't over, Natalie. You have no idea what you're doing." "Actually, I know exactly what I'm doing," I replied calmly. "I'm protecting what I built from people who tried to steal it through deception and manipulation." As the board meeting continued with additional protective resolutions, including placing Martin Rodriguez on administrative leave pending investigation, the Reynolds Group representatives departed with barely concealed anger. Their carefully plotted acquisition had not only been blocked, but publicly exposed in a way that would raise serious questions about their business practices. Security personnel arrived discreetly to escort Greg and Martin from the building once the formal resolutions had passed, with instructions to surrender company devices and access credentials. The humiliation was clearly crushing for Greg, whose reputation among Portland's business elite had been impeccable until today. "You'll regret this," he muttered as he was led past me, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You think you've won, but you've just started a war you can't possibly win." I didn't respond, refusing to engage with threats that stemmed from wounded pride rather than actual leverage. Instead, I turned my attention to the shell-shocked board members who were still processing the morning's revelations. "I understand. This has been overwhelming," I acknowledged, addressing them directly. "The depth of deception involved is difficult to comprehend, and there are still many aspects we need to investigate fully. What matters now is stabilizing Evergreen and protecting our mission." Philip nodded firmly. "You have my complete support, Natalie. Whatever resources you need during this transition." "Mine as well," Thomas added, "though I think we need to discuss how we communicate this situation to employees and shareholders. The rumor mill will be churning the moment Greg and Martin are seen leaving with security." He was right, of course. The internal and external messaging around these events would be critical to maintaining confidence in Evergreen during a period of potential instability. "I have a crisis communications team on standby," Vanessa informed us. "They've prepared draft statements for different stakeholder groups that focus on continuity and governance protections rather than sensationalizing the attempted takeover." As the meeting shifted to addressing immediate operational needs, including appointing our controller as acting CFO and establishing a special committee to oversee the investigation, I found myself experiencing a strange sense of calm amidst the chaos. The worst had happened. The betrayal had been executed, the conspiracy revealed, yet Evergreen remained standing. My life's work had survived its greatest threat. By late afternoon, the initial crisis response was well underway. Employees had been briefed in department meetings led by trusted managers, emphasizing that Evergreen's mission and operations would continue uninterrupted. Key clients and partners had received personal calls assuring them of stability. The board had unanimously approved a comprehensive audit of all financial transactions from the past 18 months. I finally had a moment alone in my office, looking out over the Portland skyline as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city. The door opened quietly as Eleanor entered, carrying 2 cups of tea. "You should eat something," she advised, placing a protein bar beside 1 cup. "Crisis management requires fuel." I smiled wearily, accepting both the tea and the advice. "Thank you for everything today. Your immediate support made all the difference." Eleanor settled into the chair across from my desk, her expression contemplative. "You know, when I first invested in Evergreen, some of my colleagues thought I was making a sentimental decision, backing a female founder with limited business experience but boundless passion for changing the energy landscape." "Were they right?" I asked, curious about her perspective after all these years. "Partially," she admitted with a small smile. "There was indeed a sentimental element. I saw in you the same fire I'd had at your age, the determination to succeed where others predicted failure. But sentiment doesn't cloud my judgment when it comes to business. I invested because you had something more valuable than experience." "Which was?" "Integrity," Eleanor stated simply. The genuine belief that business success and positive impact aren't competing goals but complementary ones. That integrity is precisely what Greg and Reynolds tried to exploit, and ultimately what protected Evergreen when it mattered most. Her words provided unexpected comfort. In the flood of practical concerns and urgent decisions, I hadn't fully processed the emotional impact of Greg's betrayal. My husband of 13 years had not only conspired against my company, but against the core values that defined my life's work. "Do you want to talk about the personal side of this?" Eleanor asked gently, always perceptive. "Not yet," I admitted. "I need to keep Evergreen as my focus right now. The personal reckoning will have to wait." Eleanor nodded, understanding the compartmentalization necessary to function during crisis. "Well, when you're ready, remember you're not alone in this. Many of us have weathered personal betrayals alongside professional ones. It doesn't define you." Our conversation was interrupted by Zoe, who entered with barely contained urgency. "Natalie, there's something you need to see immediately. IT just discovered it during the system audit." She placed a tablet before me, displaying an email exchange between Greg and Cassandra Winters that hadn't been in our initial evidence collection. This one, dated just 3 days earlier, discussed contingency plans if their primary acquisition strategy failed. "If she somehow blocks the board approval," Greg had written, "implement Plan B immediately. The offshore transfers are already in motion and can't be reversed without her authentication codes." "What offshore transfers?" I asked sharply, alarm rising as I scanned the cryptic message. Zoe pulled up a second screen showing financial alerts from our banking partners. Multiple wire transfers initiated this morning from our main operational accounts to entities in the Cayman Islands. Almost $27 million total, set to clear at midnight tonight. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Even after being exposed and removed, Greg had implemented a scorched earth contingency plan, attempt to cripple Evergreen financially if he couldn't acquire it. "Can we stop the transfers?" Eleanor asked, immediately grasping the severity of the situation. "Not without the authentication codes," Zoe explained. Greg set these up using the emergency financial protocols established after the ransomware attack last year. They're designed to be irreversible without the original authorizing credentials. "Which he has," I concluded grimly. "Get Ryan and the financial team in here now, and contact Andrew. We need emergency court orders to freeze these transactions." The next 2 hours became a frantic race against time as we attempted to thwart Greg's financial sabotage. Ryan's team identified the receiving entities as shell companies connected to both Reynolds Group and, surprisingly, Foster and Associates, Greg's personal financial consultancy. The transactions had been disguised as emergency vendor payments, using legitimate supplier names but redirecting the funds to fraudulent accounts. "The banks are cooperating, but they're limited by the same security protocols we implemented to protect against external threats," Ryan explained, the irony evident in his voice. "We never anticipated the threat would come from within our own executive team." "What about Greg?" I asked. "Can we compel him to reverse the transactions?" Andrew shook his head grimly. "We're trying, but he's not responding to calls or legal notices. His attorney has issued a blanket statement denying any wrongdoing and claiming these are legitimate business transactions approved by proper authorities." "Which is technically true," Ryan noted. "He used your pre-approved contingency protocols. The system worked exactly as designed. It's just being exploited by its designer." As midnight approached, with millions of dollars poised to vanish from Evergreen's accounts, I found myself facing a painful realization. The systems I'd trusted, the safeguards I'd implemented, the husband I'd loved, all had been turned against me and the company I'd built. "There's one more option," Zoe suggested hesitantly. "Danielle Cooper might know something that could help." "Danielle? Why?" I asked, confused by the apparent non sequitur. "Because she helped develop the authentication protocol," Zoe explained, Remember? After the ransomware attack, when we were redesigning all our financial security systems? She and Greg worked together on implementing the emergency transfer protocols. Hope flared briefly. Get her on the phone, now. Within minutes, Danielle's voice filled the conference room via speakerphone. After a quick explanation of our situation, she was silent for several moments. The authentication system has a design feature Greg might not remember, she finally said. A failsafe we implemented specifically to prevent rogue transfers. What kind of failsafe? Ryan asked, leaning forward intently. A secondary override that requires biometric confirmation from 2 C-level executives if the transfer amount exceeds certain parameters, Danielle explained. Greg insisted it be implemented as protection against external threats, but I designed it to be a check against internal misuse as well. And you think the current transfers would trigger this failsafe? I asked, hope building. Definitely. Anything over $10 million automatically requires dual executive biometric verification. Even with his authorization codes, the transfers should be held in a pending state until secondary confirmation is provided. Ryan was already pulling up the banking portal, navigating quickly to transaction status. She's right, he confirmed, relief evident in his voice. The transactions are showing as pending secondary authorization. They haven't cleared. Can we cancel them? Eleanor asked the critical question. Better than that, Danielle replied. As CEO, Natalie can reject them with her biometric confirmation, which will automatically flag them as potentially fraudulent and freeze the receiving accounts as well. For the first time since discovering Greg's betrayal, I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. Zoe, get the authentication scanner from my office. Let's shut down Plan B. Within 30 minutes, the transactions had been formally rejected, with automated notifications sent to our banking partners and regulatory authorities flagging potential fraud. The receiving accounts were frozen pending investigation, and the funds remained safely within Evergreen's control. One crisis averted, Eleanor observed as the team collectively exhaled. But this confirms Greg is willing to take extreme measures. We need to anticipate other potential sabotage efforts. She was right, of course. If Greg had implemented one contingency plan, there might be others we hadn't yet discovered. Despite the late hour, we organized teams to conduct comprehensive reviews of all systems, contracts, and external relationships that Greg had influenced. Focus on anything involving actual or intellectual assets, I instructed. Property leases, patent filings, client contracts, anything that could be manipulated to damage Evergreen if the acquisition failed. As the various teams dispersed to begin their investigations, I found myself alone with Vanessa for the first time since the board meeting. You should go home and rest, she advised, concern evident in her expression. It's been one of the most intense days of your life, and tomorrow won't be any easier. I shook my head slowly. I can't go back to the house tonight, not after everything that's happened. The thought of returning to the home I'd shared with Greg, surrounded by photographs and memories now tainted by betrayal, was unbearable. Stay with me, Vanessa offered immediately. My guest room is always ready, and you shouldn't be alone right now anyway. The offer was tempting, but incomplete. I need clothes, toiletries. Already handled, Zoe interrupted, entering with a small overnight bag. I took the liberty of asking your assistant to put together essentials from your emergency travel kit. Everything you need for a couple of days. The thoughtfulness of the gesture nearly broke through the professional composure I'd maintained throughout this extraordinary day. Thank you, I managed, accepting the bag with genuine gratitude. Around midnight, having confirmed that no immediate threats remained to Evergreen's operations, I finally left headquarters with Vanessa. The city lights blurred through the car windows as we drove in companionable silence to her downtown condo. Do you want to talk about it now? She asked gently once we were settled in her living room, glasses of wine in hand. Not the business implications, the personal ones. The question pierced the careful compartmentalization I'd maintained all day. Emotions I'd suppressed to function effectively now threatened to overwhelm me. Betrayal, anger, humiliation, grief for a relationship that had apparently been strategic rather than genuine. I keep asking myself when it started, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. When did my husband begin seeing me as an obstacle rather than a partner? Was anything between us ever real? Vanessa considered this thoughtfully. People are complex, Nat. It's possible, likely even, that Greg's feelings evolved over time. The man who married you 13 years ago may have genuinely loved you then, and grew to resent me as Evergreen succeeded, I finished, the pattern becoming clearer. I've seen how he reacts when introduced as Natalie Foster's husband at industry events. I always thought he was secure enough to handle it. Few people are genuinely comfortable living in someone else's shadow, especially men raised with certain expectations about career dynamics, Vanessa observed without judgment. Add Cassandra back into the equation, a woman from his past who probably reflected back the image of himself he preferred, and you have a powerful cocktail of resentment, opportunity, and rationalization. That doesn't excuse what he did, I said firmly. Not remotely, Vanessa agreed. Understanding the psychology doesn't diminish the betrayal. He made calculated choices to harm you and everything you've built. That's unforgivable regardless of his internal justifications. We talked long into the night, parsing through memories and interactions that now carried new significance in light of Greg's betrayal. The anniversary gifts that seemed thoughtful but subtly undermined my confidence. The career advice that consistently emphasized balance and delegation rather than growth and achievement. The social connections that, in retrospect, always centered around his network rather than mine. I feel like such a fool, I confessed around 2 a.m. Exhaustion, making me more vulnerable than I'd allowed myself to be all day. All the signs were there, I just didn't want to see them. You trusted your husband, Vanessa countered firmly. That doesn't make you a fool, Nat. It makes you human. The failure here is entirely his, not yours. As I finally prepared for sleep in Vanessa's tastefully appointed guest room, my phone buzzed with a text message. Expecting another update from the crisis team, I was surprised to see Greg's name on the screen. You won this round? Impressive. But don't forget, I know all your weaknesses, all your vulnerabilities. This isn't finished between us. The transparent attempt at intimidation might have worked yesterday. Today, after everything I'd discovered and addressed, it merely confirmed that I'd made the right decision in exposing his schemes. I didn't respond, simply forwarding the message to Andrew to add to the growing evidence file. As I finally drifted toward sleep, one thought provided unexpected comfort. Greg believed he knew my weaknesses because he'd spent years studying them, looking for points of exploitation. What he failed to understand was that in doing so, he'd inadvertently forced me to recognize and strengthen those very vulnerabilities. The woman who had uncovered his betrayal today was not the same woman he had married, or the same woman he had planned to deceive in Aspen. She was stronger, more resilient, and absolutely determined to protect what she had built, no matter what challenges still lay ahead. Morning arrived with the insistent buzz of multiple text notifications. I blinked awake in Vanessa's guest room, momentarily disoriented, before the events of the previous day came rushing back. Reaching for my phone, I found messages from Eleanor, Ryan, Andrew, and various Evergreen executives, all requiring immediate attention. The crisis hadn't paused for sleep. Coffee's ready, Vanessa called from the kitchen. She was already dressed in another impeccable suit, looking far more refreshed than someone who'd been up until 3 a.m. had any right to. And I made protein smoothies. You'll need the energy. I joined her, gratefully accepting both offerings. Have you seen the news? She nodded grimly, sliding her tablet across the counter. The business section headline read, Evergreen Innovation Labs in turmoil. CFO and financial officer suspended amid acquisition controversy. The article beneath contained carefully phrased speculation about governance disagreements and strategic direction conflicts. Clearly written by someone working with limited information but aware something significant had occurred. Could be worse, I observed, scanning the relatively factual reporting. At least they haven't invented wild scenarios or taken sides. That won't last, Vanessa warned. Greg's not going to remain silent, and Reynolds Group has an aggressive PR team. We need to establish our narrative before they control it. She was right, of course. Corporate crises followed predictable patterns, and controlling public perception would be crucial to maintaining investor confidence and employee morale. I called Zoe while finishing my smoothie, instructing her to arrange a press conference for later that morning. The investment community is in a frenzy, she reported. Our stock is currently halted pending clarification of material events. Clients are calling for reassurance, and 3 major partners want to know if their contracts are affected. Tell them our CEO will address all concerns at 11, Vanessa instructed, and make sure the communications team has distributed those talking points we prepared to all department heads. By 8 o'clock, we were back at Evergreen headquarters, where the atmosphere vibrated with tense energy. Employees whispered in clusters, conversations halting awkwardly when I passed. Their uncertainty was palpable. In 24 hours, their CFO and financial officer had been escorted from the building. Reynolds Group executives had departed in obvious anger, and security protocols had been mysteriously enhanced overnight. Eleanor was waiting in my office with Ryan and Andrew, their expressions serious but not dire. "Progress report," she said without preamble. "Financial systems are secure. All accounts have been verified and additional protections implemented." Ryan's team worked through the night. "We found 3 more attempts to move assets," Ryan added, handing me a detailed report. Smaller amounts directed through different channels, all initiated using Greg's credentials, all blocked and flagged. "And legal developments?" I asked, turning to Andrew. "The temporary restraining orders have been formally served to both Greg and Reynolds Group. Their attorneys have filed the expected objections, but the judge has scheduled an expedited hearing for tomorrow morning." Andrew's expression suggested cautious optimism. "We have a strong case for extending the orders, given the evidence of attempted financial transfers last night." I nodded, processing the update. "What about personal matters? My home, joint accounts?" "Already handled," Vanessa assured me. "Your personal accounts have been separated from any joint holdings, and I've arranged for security at your home. The locks were changed last night." The practical efficiency with which my team had dismantled my marriage alongside securing my company should have been jarring, but I felt only gratitude for their thoroughness. Every potential vulnerability was being systematically addressed, allowing me to focus on Evergreen's immediate needs. "There's one more thing," Eleanor said, her tone shifting slightly. "Greg has made a statement to select industry contacts. Nothing public yet, but Marcus Wellington from the Portland Business Journal gave me a courtesy call." Marcus was an old friend of Eleanor's, known for his ethical approach to financial journalism. Greg is positioning this as a difference in strategic vision where your emotional attachment to Evergreen's original mission is preventing necessary growth. The strategy was both predictable and infuriating. Cast the female CEO as emotionally overwrought, unable to make rational business decisions because of sentimental attachment to her creation. It was a narrative designed to resonate with certain investors and industry leaders who already harbored biases about women in executive positions. He's laying groundwork to justify what he did, I concluded, anger crystallizing into resolve. Trying to make the attempted hostile takeover seem like a reasonable response to my supposed irrationality. Exactly, Eleanor confirmed. Which makes your press conference all the more critical. You need to be the embodiment of rational, strategic leadership today. The executive team gathered before the press conference, reviewing key messages and anticipated questions. Philip Chen had taken temporary responsibility for financial oversight, while Thomas Wilson was coordinating with our research division to ensure all intellectual property remained secure. Diane Murray, initially hesitant during yesterday's revelations, had fully committed to supporting Evergreen's independence after reviewing the complete evidence package. "Remember," Vanessa advised as we prepared to face the media, "this isn't about Greg or your personal situation. It's about Evergreen's mission, governance, and future. Keep the focus on the company, not the individuals involved." The press room was packed beyond capacity. Local business reporters joined by national financial press and industry trade publications. Camera flashes created a strobing effect as I approached the podium, flanked by Eleanor and Philip. I had chosen a navy suit that projected authority without aggression, paired with minimal jewelry and the confident posture I'd perfected over years of investor presentations. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady despite the tension coiling in my stomach. "Thank you for joining us on short notice. I want to address the situation at Evergreen Innovation Labs directly and transparently. Yesterday, our board of directors took decisive action to protect this company's core assets and mission after discovering evidence of unauthorized negotiations and financial irregularities involving our former CFO Gregory Foster and financial officer Martin Rodriguez. Both have been placed on administrative leave pending a thorough investigation, and appropriate interim leadership has been established to ensure operational continuity." The room erupted with shouted questions, but I held up a hand, maintaining control of the narrative. "I'll take questions shortly, but first let me be absolutely clear about what Evergreen stands for and where we're headed. Evergreen Innovation Labs was founded with a specific mission: developing sustainable energy, technologies that accelerate our transition away from fossil fuels. That mission remains unchanged and non-negotiable. Our recent breakthrough in advanced battery storage technology represents a critical innovation for renewable energy viability, and we are fully committed to bringing it to market as rapidly as possible." I continued outlining Evergreen's stable financial position, our ongoing commitment to existing contracts and partnerships, and the board's unanimous support for the company's strategic direction. Only then did I open the floor to questions, which came immediately. "Mrs. Foster," began a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, "sources indicate Reynolds Group had proposed a substantial acquisition offer. Was this rejected purely on mission alignment issues, or were there concerns about valuation?" The question attempted to frame the situation as a standard business disagreement rather than what it actually was, an attempt at corporate theft, facilitated by insider betrayal. My response needed to correct this mischaracterization without appearing defensive. To clarify, Reynolds Group never presented a formal offer to Evergreen's full board, I explained calmly. What we discovered were unauthorized parallel negotiations being conducted without proper disclosure or board approval, involving significant misrepresentation of Evergreen's technology roadmap and business strategy. This represents a fundamental governance breach, not a typical M&A discussion. Another reporter jumped in. "Is it true that your husband was involved in these negotiations? How has this affected your personal relationship?" Vanessa had warned me this question would come, part of the inevitable attempt to sensationalize the situation and undermine my professional standing by emphasizing personal drama. I maintained eye contact with the reporter, my expression composed. As stated in our press release, Gregory Foster, who served as Evergreen's CFO, has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation into potential breaches of fiduciary duty. I won't be commenting on personal matters unrelated to Evergreen's business operations. Next question, please. The deflection was firm but not hostile, establishing boundaries while acknowledging the underlying reality. For 90 minutes, I fielded increasingly detailed questions about Evergreen's technology, financial position, and governance structures. With each response, I demonstrated complete command of our business details, reinforcing the image of a CEO whose decisions were driven by strategic insight rather than emotional attachment. When asked directly about allegations that I was blocking necessary growth due to sentimentality, I allowed myself a small, confident smile. Evergreen's compound annual growth rate has averaged 32% over the past 5 years. Our most recent battery storage innovation has attracted partnership interest from 3 of the largest utility providers in North America. Last quarter's financial results exceeded analyst expectations by 17%. Those facts speak for themselves regarding our growth trajectory and my leadership approach. By the time the press conference concluded, the narrative had noticeably shifted. Business reporters were asking more questions about Evergreen's technology and less about the attempted takeover drama. Industry analysts were discussing the implications of our battery innovations rather than speculating about corporate conflict. Most importantly, Evergreen was being portrayed as a stable, forward-looking company that had successfully navigated a governance challenge, not a company in turmoil. "Masterfully handled," Eleanor murmured as we exited the press room. "The stock will stabilize when trading resumes." The remainder of the day involved marathon meetings with key stakeholders, major clients seeking reassurance, research team leaders concerned about project continuity, manufacturing partners, confirming supply chain stability. By late afternoon, I had personally spoken with Evergreen's 20 largest customers, all of whom had committed to maintaining our relationship after receiving detailed briefings on the situation. Around 6, Zoe brought me a tablet displaying Evergreen's stock price, which had resumed trading after the press conference. After an initial dip, it had recovered and was now trading slightly above its previous close, a remarkable vote of market confidence given the circumstances. "The analysts are calling it the Foster Premium," Zoe reported with evident satisfaction. "They're saying your leadership through this crisis has actually increased Evergreen's perceived stability and value." As the immediate crisis management activities subsided, I finally had a moment to consider my personal situation. Vanessa had arranged for security at my home, but I wasn't ready to return to a space so filled with memories and betrayal. The prospect of sorting through 13 years of shared possessions while processing such profound deception was overwhelming. "You're welcome to stay with me as long as needed," Vanessa offered when I mentioned this concern. "But if you'd prefer more privacy, I've reserved a suite at the Headland that can be booked indefinitely." The luxury boutique hotel overlooking the river would provide both comfort and discretion, important considerations given the media attention surrounding Evergreen's situation. "The hotel, I think. I need some space to process everything." Vanessa nodded understanding. "I've already had Zoe arrange for some additional clothes and necessities to be delivered there. And I've scheduled a security assessment of your home for tomorrow afternoon if you're ready to think about what happens next." What happens next felt like an impossibly complex question, encompassing both professional and personal dimensions. Evergreen needed a comprehensive recovery strategy to address the damage Greg and Martin had inflicted on our systems and relationships. Simultaneously, I needed to untangle 13 years of marriage that had apparently evolved into an elaborate deception. As evening approached, Eleanor insisted we break for dinner, recognizing that sustainable crisis management required basic self-care. We gathered in a private dining room at a discreet restaurant near headquarters. Eleanor, Vanessa, Ryan, Andrew, Philip, and Thomas, the core team that had helped save Evergreen from disaster. "A toast," Eleanor proposed once we were settled with drinks, "to Natalie Foster, who demonstrated today why she built one of the most innovative companies in sustainable technology. Resilience isn't just a business quality, it's a personal one." The sentiment was appreciated but felt premature given how much remained unresolved. "We've survived the initial crisis," I acknowledged, "but we're far from secure. Greg knows Evergreen's vulnerabilities intimately. Reynolds Group has resources and motivation to cause further damage. This was just the first battle in what could be a prolonged war. True, Andrew conceded, but we've secured significant advantages. The restraining orders will likely be extended given the evidence of financial irregularities. Greg's attempted transfers last night demonstrated exactly the kind of behavior that justifies judicial intervention. And Reynolds Group has its own problems to worry about, Ryan added. Their shareholders can't be happy about a failed acquisition, attempt that's generated negative press about predatory business practices. Victor Hamilton is dealing with internal fallout as well as external scrutiny. Dinner conversation balanced between strategic planning and much-needed moments of normalcy. Brief respites from crisis discussion where we talked about ordinary things, shared mild jokes, existed as people rather than crisis managers. These glimpses of regular life felt like windows opening in a suffocating room, reminding me that eventually this acute phase would pass. Near the end of the meal, my phone buzzed with a notification. Checking it discreetly, I found an email from an unfamiliar address with the subject line, "What Greg didn't tell Reynolds Group." The sender was identified only as a concerned former colleague. "Excuse me," I murmured, stepping away from the table to read the message privately. "Ms. Foster," it began. "We haven't met, but I worked with your husband at Foster & Associates until resigning 3 months ago. What you may not know is that Greg has been actively shopping Evergreen to multiple potential acquirers, not just Reynolds Group. There were parallel discussions with Eastern Capital Partners and Meridian Ventures, each being told they had exclusive negotiation rights. The attached documents show preliminary terms discussed with all three. I left when I realized the ethical implications of what was happening. You should know the full scope of his activities. The attached files contained presentation decks similar to what we'd seen in the boardroom, but customized for different potential acquirers. Each emphasized different aspects of Evergreen's technology and market position, with financial projections manipulated to align with each company's strategic interests. It was a sophisticated shell game, with Greg apparently planning to initiate a bidding war once he had secured initial agreements from all parties. I returned to the table, forwarding the email to Andrew and Vanessa without comment. "New development," I said quietly. "We'll need to discuss it back at the office." Once we had returned to Evergreen's headquarters and reviewed the new information in the secure conference room, the implications became clear. "He was playing every angle," Ryan observed, scrolling through the financial projections that had been custom-tailored for each potential acquirer. Different valuations, different asset allocations, different promises about talent retention and technology development. "This actually helps our legal position considerably," Andrew noted. "It demonstrates a pattern of systematic misrepresentation and unauthorized negotiations, not just a single misjudgment." "Who sent this?" Eleanor asked the practical question. "And why now?" "The email came through an anonymizer," Vanessa reported after examining the header information. "But the content suggests someone who worked closely with Greg on these presentations, possibly becoming uncomfortable with the ethical implications as things progressed." "Can we verify its authenticity?" Philip asked, the caution that made him a valuable board member evident in his tone. Ryan nodded. "The document metadata is consistent with Foster & Associates systems, and the presentation formats match what we've already confirmed as Greg's work. I believe it's genuine." As we discussed the strategic implications of this new information, an alert appeared on the security monitors installed in the conference room. Someone had triggered the entry sensor at my home address. The security feed showed Greg attempting to enter through the back door, visibly frustrated to find the locks changed. "I'll notify the security team," Zoe said immediately, reaching for her phone. "Wait," I countermanded, watching the monitor. Greg wasn't attempting to break in. Instead, he appeared to be deliberately placing something in the garden planter beside the door, a small envelope or package. "He knows the house is under surveillance," Andrew observed. "This is a message, not an attempted entry. Once Greg had departed, I instructed the security team to retrieve whatever he had left. 20 minutes later, they reported finding a USB drive in a sealed envelope marked with my name. "Don't connect it to any Evergreen system," Ryan warned immediately. "It could contain malware designed to breach our security." "Agreed," I said. "Set up an isolated computer with no network access. We need to see what's on it without risking our systems." The technical team quickly established a quarantined workstation, and we gathered around as Ryan carefully examined the drive's contents. It contained a single video file. Greg sitting in what appeared to be a hotel room, looking directly at the camera. "Natalie," he began, his expression a complex mixture of anger and calculation. "By now you think you've won. Congratulations on rallying the board against me. It was an impressive countermove, if ultimately futile. What you don't understand is that this was never just about Evergreen." He leaned closer to the camera, his familiar face now animated with an intensity I recognized from his courtroom victories. "For years, I've watched you prioritize your precious company over everything else. Our marriage, our future, the family we once talked about having. Evergreen became your identity, your obsession, while I was relegated to Natalie Foster's supportive husband. Do you have any idea what that's like? To have your own accomplishments constantly overshadowed?" The naked resentment in his voice was jarring, revealing emotions he'd apparently concealed throughout our marriage. "Reynolds was just one option. I have contingencies you haven't discovered yet, partnerships you can't possibly anticipate. This isn't over. It's barely begun. You have 24 hours to reconsider your position. Call this number when you're ready to discuss reasonable terms for an orderly transition." The video ended abruptly, a final frame showing a phone number I didn't recognize. The room remained silent for several moments as we processed this direct communication. "Classics? Intimidation tactic," Vanessa observed finally. "Vague threats combined with a deadline designed to create pressure for concessions." "But concessions to what?" Thomas asked the question we were all considering. "He's been removed from his position. The acquisition has been blocked. What exactly does he expect to gain now?" "Control," I said quietly, understanding dawning as I reflected on Greg's words. This was never just about money or corporate assets. It was about him asserting control over something I built, proving he could take it if he wanted to. Eleanor nodded slowly. Men like Greg often mask control issues beneath rational business language. The psychological component here shouldn't be underestimated. "So, how do we respond?" Philip asked, ever practical. "We don't," I decided after careful consideration. Any response validates his approach and encourages further manipulation attempts. We continue securing Evergreen against whatever contingencies he believes he's established, but we don't engage directly with threats or ultimatums. Andrew concurred. "From a legal perspective, this video actually strengthens our position. It demonstrates retaliatory intent and ongoing attempts to interfere with company operations despite the restraining orders." As the team dispersed to implement additional security measures based on this new development, I found myself experiencing an unexpected emotion beneath the stress and strategic calculations, a profound sense of clarity. Seeing Greg's unfiltered resentment, hearing him explicitly frame Evergreen as competition for his ego rather than our shared project, crystallized something I had been struggling to accept. The betrayal wasn't a sudden ethical lapse or a purely financial calculation. It represented the culmination of feelings he had harbored for years, feelings he had chosen to conceal rather than address honestly. Our marriage had been compromised long before he began negotiating with Reynolds Group. "You okay?" Vanessa asked softly, noting my momentary introspection. "Actually, yes," I replied, surprising myself with the truth of it. Seeing him like that, raw, resentful, focused entirely on his wounded pride, It answered questions I've been asking myself since this began. Questions about what was real in our relationship. And the answer? His resentment was real, I said simply. His pride was real. Everything else, the partnership, the support, the shared vision, that's what was manufactured. As I prepared to leave for the hotel, Eleanor approached with uncharacteristic hesitation. I don't mean to overstep, but I've been through something similar. Not identical, but similar enough. My second husband couldn't handle my success either, though he expressed it differently. I hadn't known this about Eleanor, who rarely discussed her personal life. How did you get through it? By remembering that his limitations weren't my failure, she said simply. And by recognizing that the qualities that threatened him, my ambition, my vision, my resilience, were precisely what made me successful. I didn't need to diminish myself to accommodate his insecurity. Her words resonated deeply, offering a framework for processing what felt like an impossibly complex emotional situation. Thank you for sharing that, I said quietly. It helps more than you know. One day at a time, Natalie, she advised. Focus on what needs immediate attention. The rest will sort itself gradually. At the Headland Hotel, I found the suite. Vanessa had arranged impeccably prepared, with the additional clothes and personal items Zoe had organized discreetly arranged in the bedroom. The anonymity of the space was soothing after days of emotional turbulence. No photographs to remove, no shared possessions to sort, no memories embedded in furniture or decor. Just neutral, elegant comfort, and a spectacular view of the river. As I stood at the window watching lights shimmer on the water, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. 23 hours remaining. Be reasonable, Natalie. Everyone has a price. Greg's attempt to maintain pressure, to assert some form of control despite everything that had transpired. I didn't respond, instead adding the number to my block list and forwarding the message to Andrew for the legal record. Whatever contingencies Greg believed he had established, whatever pressure he thought he could exert, one thing had become abundantly clear today. Evergreen would survive this challenge, and so would I. Not because the path forward would be easy, but because the alternative, surrendering what I had built to appease someone else's ego, was simply unacceptable. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, including the court hearing to extend the restraining orders and the ongoing investigation into exactly how deeply Greg and Martin had compromised Evergreen systems. But for tonight, in this quiet moment of reflection, I allowed myself to acknowledge a simple truth that had emerged from the chaos. In trying to destroy what I had created, Greg had inadvertently revealed exactly how strong it actually was, both the company and its founder. 6 months had passed since the morning I overheard Greg planning to sell my company during our romantic Aspen vacation. 6 months of legal proceedings, operational restructuring, and personal recalibration. The spring rain tapped gently against the windows of Evergreen's conference room as I reviewed the quarterly performance reports with our newly established executive team. Battery production capacity has increased 23% over projections, Danielle Cooper reported, the pride evident in her voice. As reinstated Chief Innovation Officer, she had transformed our research division back into the collaborative powerhouse it had been before Greg's compartmentalization strategy. 3 major utilities have committed to full-scale implementation, and the Department of Energy has approved the expanded demonstration project. Marketing impact has exceeded expectations as well, added James Hernandez, our recently hired Chief Marketing Officer. The Innovation with Integrity campaign has resonated particularly well with institutional clients. Our reputation surveys show Evergreen is now perceived as both cutting-edge and ethically grounded. The data reflected what I had sensed intuitively. Evergreen hadn't just survived the crisis, it had emerged stronger. The attempted hostile takeover, rather than destabilizing our company, had ultimately clarified our mission, and united our team around core values of transparency and environmental impact. Financial restructuring is complete, Philip Chen confirmed. After serving admirably as interim CFO during the crisis, he had agreed to take the position permanently. All irregular transactions have been reversed, security protocols overhauled, and our new distributed authorization system is functioning flawlessly. Each report represented countless hours of dedicated work by teams across Evergreen. The systematic dismantling of Greg's sabotage had required forensic accounting, legal, intervention, and technological innovation. What had been designed to fracture us had instead forced us to rebuild on stronger foundations. Questions before we adjourn? I asked, surveying the faces around the table, some familiar, some new, all committed to Evergreen's mission. Eleanor. Jackson, who had remained a steadfast ally throughout the recovery process, spoke up. The Reynolds Group settlement. Any update? Andrew Morrison nodded. Final terms were approved yesterday. They've withdrawn all claims related to the proposed acquisition, acknowledged improper conduct in their approach, and agreed to significant financial compensation for the intellectual property breaches we documented. The settlement represented the end of direct legal conflict with Reynolds Group, whose board had ultimately decided that Victor Hamilton's aggressive tactics had created unacceptable liability exposure. He had been quietly replaced as CEO 3 months after our confrontation, the company publicly committing to ethical business practices and legitimate competitive approaches moving forward. And the personal matters? Eleanor asked delicately. Finalized last week, I confirmed. The divorce had been remarkably straightforward once Greg realized his leverage had evaporated. With his professional reputation damaged and financial misconduct documented, he had ultimately accepted a settlement that protected my controlling interest in Evergreen while providing him a clean exit from both the marriage and Portland's business community. Last I heard, he had relocated to Seattle, ironically close to the Reynolds Group headquarters where he had once envisioned himself working. As the meeting concluded and the team dispersed, I remained at the conference table, reflecting on the journey of the past 6 months. The initial trauma of betrayal had gradually transformed into something unexpected, a profound reassessment of both my company and myself. "You've got that look again," Vanessa observed, closing the door as the others departed. "What look is that?" I asked, smiling at my friend who had been indispensable through every phase of this ordeal. "The I'm mentally rewriting the entire business plan look," she replied, settling into a chair beside me. "The same one you had right after the board meeting when you realized Evergreen wasn't just going to survive, it was going to transform." She wasn't wrong. In the weeks following the crisis, I had indeed reimagined Evergreen's structure and strategy, implementing changes that went far beyond merely repairing damage. We had reorganized into more collaborative divisions, expanded our sustainability metrics beyond standard industry practices, and established an employee ownership program that aligned individual success with company mission. Actually, I was thinking about next week's leadership conference, I admitted. The invitation to keynote the Women in Sustainable Innovation Summit had arrived 3 months ago, an opportunity to share lessons from Evergreen's transformation with other female founders and executives. "Nervous?" Vanessa asked. "Not about the speaking part," I clarified. "About sharing something so personal in a professional context, finding the right balance between vulnerability and leadership." The speech would mark my first public discussion of how personal betrayal had impacted my professional journey, a deliberate choice to integrate these aspects of my experience rather than compartmentalizing them. The early drafts had been challenging to write, requiring me to synthesize painful memories into constructive insights. "Trust your instincts," Vanessa advised. "The same instincts that told you something was wrong when you overheard that phone call. The same instincts that guided you through the crisis when everyone expected you to falter." My phone chimed with a calendar reminder, the mentor meeting I'd scheduled with Evergreen's newest innovation team. 6 recent female engineering graduates we'd recruited through the STEM outreach program I'd established in the aftermath of the crisis. The program had been a direct response to realizing how few women occupied leadership positions in sustainability, technology, and how that imbalance created vulnerability in corporate governance. "Duty calls," I said, gathering my materials. "Final review of the speech tomorrow?" "Wouldn't miss it," Vanessa promised. The mentorship session energized me in ways executive meetings rarely did. These brilliant young women approached sustainable technology with fresh perspectives and ambitious goals, unhampered by traditional industry limitations. Their questions were incisive, their proposed solutions innovative, their commitment to environmental impact unwavering. "Ms. Foster," asked Maya Patel, whose breakthrough lithium recycling concept had already attracted attention from manufacturing partners, "how did you maintain confidence in your vision when established industry leaders dismissed it as impractical?" The question resonated beyond its surface level, touching on challenges I'd faced throughout Evergreen's development, and particularly during the recent crisis. By distinguishing between informed criticism and reflexive resistance, I explained, valuable feedback helps refine your approach without derailing your core mission. The key is recognizing the difference between someone saying, "This specific approach needs adjustment," versus, "Your entire concept is flawed." I didn't add the personal dimension, that this same discernment had ultimately helped me recognize Greg's undermining behaviors for what they were, rather than internalizing them as valid limitations on my vision. Some lessons remained too raw for casual sharing. After the mentorship session concluded, I drove to the Riverside Park that had become my thinking spot during difficult days. The spring evening was mild, cherry blossoms drifting across the path as I walked along the water's edge. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined feeling this centered, this purposeful, in the aftermath of such profound betrayal. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "Eleanor called. The feature article is live online, print edition tomorrow. She thinks you'll be pleased." The Portland Business Journal had spent 2 months developing an in-depth piece on Evergreen's transformation, interviewing everyone from board members to research scientists to industry partners. I had granted limited access myself, focusing interviews on business strategy rather than personal elements. Opening the link, I found the headline striking in its directness. "Innovation Resistant to Takeover: How Evergreen Labs Transformed Crisis into Catalyst." The article chronicled Evergreen's journey from startup to industry leader, including the attempted hostile takeover described in carefully neutral business language. What struck me most, however, was the final section examining the company's evolution in the aftermath, the new governance structures, expanded research collaborations, and community engagement initiatives that had emerged from the crisis. In an industry where acquisition often signals the end of innovative vision, the article concluded, Evergreen has demonstrated that maintaining independence can drive both technological advancement and market success. CEO Natalie Foster's leadership, through crisis, has established a new model for sustainable technology governance, one that prioritizes mission integrity alongside financial performance. As I finished reading, another text appeared from Danielle. Federal grant approved, full funding for the Rural Implementation Project. The grant represented a breakthrough opportunity, bringing our battery storage technology to remote communities traditionally dependent on diesel generators. It was precisely the kind of high-impact, low-profit application that Reynolds Group would have immediately abandoned. Yet it aligned perfectly with Evergreen's expanded mission. Walking back to my car, I passed young families enjoying the park's meme playgrounds, couples strolling along riverside paths, elderly neighbors chatting on benches, ordinary lives intersecting briefly with mine. They knew nothing of corporate takeovers or betrayals, board meetings or restraining orders. Yet the technology Evergreen was developing would eventually touch their lives, making renewable energy more accessible, reducing environmental impact, creating a more sustainable community. This connection, between abstract corporate decisions and tangible human impact, had always formed the core of my vision for Evergreen. Greg had never truly understood that, seeing only market potential and profit margins. His betrayal, painful as it had been, had ultimately freed both Evergreen and me from a partnership that subtly constrained our potential. The following week, I stood at the podium of the Women in Sustainable Innovation Summit, looking out over an audience of female founders, executives, researchers, and students. Their collective expertise and vision represented a powerful force for transformation in an industry traditionally dominated by men, exactly the network of allies I had lacked during Evergreen's early years. My prepared remarks today were titled, "Corporate Resilience in Crisis," I began, setting aside the speech I'd rehearsed. But I've decided to speak more directly about something we rarely discuss in professional settings: how personal betrayal intersects with our professional identities, and what that intersection can teach us about authentic leadership. For the next 30 minutes, I shared the journey of the past 6 months, not the sanitized business case study version, but the messy, painful, ultimately transformative reality. I spoke about discovering deception from those closest to me, about facing coordinated attempts to dismantle what I had built, about finding strength in vulnerability and clarity in crisis. What I learned through this experience wasn't just about corporate governance or financial security, I explained. It was about recognizing that the qualities often used against women in leadership, our passion for mission over pure profit, our emphasis on collaborative rather than hierarchical structures, our integration of purpose with performance, are actually profound strengths when embraced authentically. As I concluded, the room remained silent for a moment before erupting into sustained applause. Women rose to their feet, many with tears visible despite professional composures. They recognized elements of their own struggles in my story: the subtle undermining, the questioned competence, the challenges to legitimate authority that female leaders frequently encounter. The reception afterward brought a stream of conversations with women sharing their own experiences of navigating betrayal and resilience in professional settings. Each exchange reinforced what I had gradually come to understand. My story, though personally painful, held value for others facing similar challenges. "Your speech was brave," Eleanor commented as the event concluded, "and necessary. These experiences remain largely unspoken in business contexts, which only perpetuates isolation when they occur." "It felt right," I acknowledged. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined speaking so openly. But separating personal and professional experiences creates a false distinction when they're fundamentally interconnected. As we left the conference center, Eleanor's expression grew thoughtful. "Have you considered what comes next? For you? Personally, I mean. Evergreen is thriving, your leadership position is secure. But life extends beyond work, even for those of us who love what we do." The question was gentle but pointed, addressing what I had deliberately avoided confronting while focused on Evergreen's recovery. In rebuilding my company, I had necessarily deprioritized rebuilding my personal life. The divorce was finalized. The legal battles concluded, yet I had done little to envision what came after crisis management and corporate restoration. "I'm still figuring that out," I admitted. "For now, I'm focusing on what I can build rather than what was lost." "A good starting point," Eleanor agreed. "Just don't wait too long to expand that vision. The same imagination that built Evergreen can build a rich personal life aligned with your authentic self." Back at my newly purchased home, a modern, riverside property with abundant natural light and absolutely no memories of my previous life, I stood on the deck watching evening settle over Portland. The city lights reflected on the water, a visual echo of Evergreen's logo illuminated on our headquarters building downtown. My phone contained dozens of messages responding to the day's speech, colleagues offering support, industry partners expressing admiration, young women seeking mentorship. Each represented a connection formed or strengthened through authentic sharing rather than professional posturing. 6 months ago, Greg had planned to use an Aspen vacation as cover to dismantle everything I had built. His betrayal had been calculated, comprehensive, designed to leave me personally devastated and professionally diminished. The perfect plan, orchestrated by someone who believed he understood my vulnerabilities completely. What neither Greg nor Reynolds Group had anticipated was how crisis could clarify purpose rather than destroying it. In attempting to exploit perceived weaknesses, they had inadvertently revealed unexpected strengths in Evergreen's mission, in our governance structures, in my own leadership capacity. The emergency board meeting I had called that day hadn't just changed Evergreen's trajectory. It had transformed my understanding of resilience itself. Not as the absence of vulnerability, but as the capacity to integrate challenge into growth. Not as individual prowess, but as the strength of aligned community. Not as avoiding pain, but as finding meaning within it. As darkness settled over the river, I smiled at the unexpected truth that had emerged from months of turbulence. Sometimes what seems like an ending, a betrayal, a loss, a fundamental disruption, actually creates space for a more authentic beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.